We are excited to have you here for today's session. It's called Mission-Driven Storytelling, Engaging Talent and Teams with Authentic Narratives with David Collins. Yay! Now please join me in welcoming David for the session titled Mission-Driven Storytelling, Engaging Talent and Teams with Authentic Narratives. Thank you.
All right. How about another round of applause for me? That was unnecessary and uncalled for. Welcome, everyone, to today's afternoon session. I have the coveted digestion time slot of 2:15 p.m. So before we get into any content, I am curious. Show me on a scale of 1 to 10, as my 2-year-old would say, 1 to 10 thingies. What's our energy level right now? 10 out of 10 is you're jumping out of your seat, you just had a Red Bull. 0 fists is like, I'm asleep. Okay, we got some 10s. I see some single hands. I want to respect that energy level. Here's what I'll say. I'm going to get right into it. The format of today's roundtable session involves me talking for about 20-25 minutes. I'm going to have a video, we're going to do a warm-up, then we're going to do an exercise at the end, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So this will not just be me talking, we're going to get some exercises in, we're going to practice storytelling. So that's the whole idea of this workshop today. It's not just a lecture, it's a mini version of a workshop that I'll run with teams and whatnot. So with that groundwork being laid, let me introduce myself. My name is Dave. I am the founder of Oak and Reads. It's an interactive training consultancy where I combine tools from the worlds of change and change management and the worlds of improvisational comedy to help managers and leaders and teams work through the unknown. And I've been working for 10 years on this. Prior to that, I was a change management consultant, and I've been coaching and performing improv comedy for 20 plus years. It's my passion, I love it. And I mashed those two things together to start my own business. And for those of you who were in my morning session on change, let me show, okay, who was there? Okay, great. I'm not gonna ask you, because I'm gonna tell the same story. That's the only repeat. The story of my name is actually something I borrowed from Aesop's fables. So I named my business after a story. That's how much I believe in the power of story to show and not tell. And so the name of my business is Oak and Reads, and it's named after Aesop's fable called The Oak and the Reeds. And the 30-second version of that story goes like this. There was a big, tall oak tree standing by the side of the river. And the oak tree, as most oak trees do, had a little bit of an attitude. And the oak tree was saying, look at me, I'm this fantastic oak tree. I've got these deep roots, this thick, massive trunk, these long, beautiful branches, and these thousands of lovely, beautiful leaves. And it was talking to some reeds. And the reeds, these tall grasses by the side of the river, was talking down to the reeds and saying, look at you, you're puny. You're weak. Every time there's a little breeze, you blow over and touch the ground. I can't imagine how you survived. You're weak. But then, overnight, a huge storm rolled in. Lots of wind, rain, thunder, lightning, hail, everything. And the storm was so strong, it actually picked the oak tree up from the ground, snapped its trunk in half, and killed it instantly. But the reeds, on the other hand, survived. Every time there was a gust of wind, they blew over, and then just like they'd done for years before that, they popped right back up the next morning like nothing had even happened. So the moral, like any good Aesop's fable, the moral is clear. It doesn't matter how big and strong you are. It doesn't matter how many employees you have. It doesn't matter how many credentials you have or fancy titles after your name. It doesn't matter how many millions of revenue your organization does or how many billions under management. What matters to individuals and teams facing change is flexibility. You have to bend and yield to every breeze. That's something I believe so foundationally to my core. I named my dang business that. And so I firmly believe in the power of story to show people what you need, whether it's your values or your mission or your outcomes, to show rather than tell on a bunch of bullet points. So that's what we're going to practice today. And practice is the operative word. I want to hear the stories of your names. This is going to be a 5-minute warm-up with the people at your table. So hopefully you said hi to them. If not, now's a great opportunity. Here's what I want you to do. With groups of 2 and 3, if you have more than 4 people, just split off. I'd like you to tell your partner or partners, where does your name come from? It could be, how did you get your first name? How did your parents or guardians or relatives name you? Where does your family name come from? Or maybe you have a nickname you feel comfortable sharing with a complete stranger. Where did your name come from? Let's take 5 minutes, share those, and then when we come back, we'll move on. Does that make sense? 5 minutes on the clock. Give it a shot. Say hi. Where's your name from? To get 200 people to be quiet. I loved what I was hearing. We could go on and on. It's eavesdropping a little bit, as I'm wont to do. I love this exercise. I've done it probably 1,000 times at this point. And it's one of my favorite exercises. Normally, if we were a smaller group, I'd get some people to share the stories of their names. But because we're short on time, we're going to keep moving. You can run this exercise on your own. Right? This is something you now can facilitate. And it's really important to remember the reason why I open up a workshop on storytelling with an exercise like this is, one, everyone can do it. I did not see a single person combust into flames when attempting this. It's simple, it's straightforward, and I cannot tell you the amount of times I do this workshop with a team that maybe has known each other for a decade or decade plus and go, I had no idea that about you. I had no idea. Whatever the thing is that they just learned. So it's fun, you learn something about someone, and it's a story. So many people go, oh, I'm not a storyteller, and then they tell me this fantastic origin story about where their family name comes from. And I go, you just did. You just told a story. And third, these are always interesting. I'm never bored by these stories because, this is a really important thing I'll keep coming back to again and again in this workshop, telling a story that is unique to you is by default interesting to your audience. You are the only person in the universe who can tell your exact name story in your exact way. And that's fascinating. You may have heard this 100 times, but to the person sitting next to you, they're going, this is the one-of-one story I've never heard before. So give yourself some credit. Talking about your own personal experiences is inherently interesting because you're the only person who can tell that story. And that is gold when it comes to storytelling. Talking about things you've experienced in your career, talking about highs, talking about emotional lows, things you've seen on a daily basis. Give yourself credit that that stuff is interesting, and the point I'm going to try to make in the next 20 minutes, not only is it interesting, it's effective. It's effective for getting your point across. That's the big reason why I'm talking to you today, right? This isn't just for fun. This is to get a point across and to influence. Why stories? If you want to read a great book on storytelling for business, read Made to Stick by the Hughes brothers. I will plug that book until the day I die. It is phenomenal. You can also just ask ChatGPT to summarize it. It'll give you the key talking points. They have a great quote. Why stories? Stories put knowledge into a framework that is more lifelike and more true to our day-to-day existence. We have evolved as humans to understand stories extremely well. And you think about it, when you tell someone a story, people know where to file away that information. They understand what characters are and what people's motivations are. They understand context, they understand conflict, they understand beginning, middle, and end. These are things that we understand at a very young age, and so it clicks into parts of our brain that we crave stories. So you're really playing into our own physiology, and I'll talk about some of the neuroscience in a minute as to why storytelling is such a great way to implant an idea in an audience that they can never forget. Don't forget your PowerPoint slides today, but a story you tell them, it will stay in their brains for weeks, months, and years. So why does this matter today? Why am I at SHRM talking about this? You own culture. There are so many opportunities to tell stories about what your organization's culture looks like when you're doing it right. That's really it. And so it's a great way to teach, here's what our values look like when we're actually living them. Here's what we expect feedback to feel like. I'm going to tell you a story about what it felt like when our exec gave me really helpful feedback and what it meant for me. And what does it look like when we are communicating in a respectful, civil way? Telling some simple stories about that. When do you do that? All the time. From onboarding, from in hiring, in interviewing, having these stories in your back pocket, talking about in performance reviews or in feedback conversations, pulling out these examples of what great looks like and then telling and retelling them as much as you can. Talking about change. If you were here in my morning workshop, we talked about change. Having some stories about what your vision looks like, what it'll feel like. Incredibly valuable to get people to buy in. Talking about belonging. When I do my workshops on how to lead inclusive teams, I have an exercise where I just get people to tell a story about when someone made you feel like you belonged. What was that moment like? What did they do? What did they say? What was the energy in the room? What was the tone? Those stories are showing rather than telling what it feels like to be included in a micro moment. So all of these are opportunities in your touch points for when stories can replace bullet points. That's my big point here. And I'll also offer this, I think I forgot to mention this. I'll give you all these slides with a QR code at the very end. So if you take your camera out, like I mentioned earlier, I love having my photo taken. But you also don't need to take photos of the slides, I'll give them all to you. But feel free to do what you want. Get this information however you'll best digest it. I'll take it a step further. It is essential that your people managers are comfortable and confident telling stories, because it's all about safety. We talk about incredibly important concepts like emotional vulnerability and psychological safety. When a leader or a people manager can talk about a situation where they've royally screwed up, what they learned from it, and how they move forward, such a better way to have a conversation with a new hire or an employee who's struggling, rather than just a classic feedback conversation. So these are ways that you can really truly show rather than tell what matters. So it can make hard messages easier to hear. It can tell people what our values are, instead of putting them on a poster in the break room and smiling at them when we see them. What are those stories that we tell and retell when we talk about why we love working here? And it's about emotion. Everything I'm going to talk about is about hitting those emotional core things inside of us that resonate, whether we're talking about emotional moments we've had, because that's the kind of stuff that is memorable. And that's going to be how you influence. You tell a story that has emotional change, and you get people to lean forward and really hear you. All right, so I want to show a story that some of us are probably familiar with, and it's the origin story of the iPhone. So this was, I would argue, one of the most consequential stories ever told. And it was Steve Jobs at Macworld giving a keynote in 2007, explaining what the iPhone will be to an audience that had never even held an iPhone before. And his task was really challenging. It was to try to paint a picture about how this new technology fit in with both Apple and would fit in to the lives of what would turn out to be billions of people. So I want to play a 3-minute story, and then I'm going to break down what he's doing here, because it's not your classical story. So let me hit play.
This is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. And Apple has been, well, first of all, one's very fortunate if you get to work on just one of these in your career. Apple's been very fortunate. It's been able to introduce a few of these into the world. In 1984, we introduced the Macintosh. It didn't just change Apple, it changed the whole computer industry. In 2001, we introduced the first iPod. And it didn't just change the way we all listen to music. It changed the entire music industry. Well, today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products in this class. The first one is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The second is a revolutionary and the third is a breakthrough internet communications device. So, 3 things. A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and and a breakthrough internet communications device. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not three separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. And here it is.
So I had to leave into a visual joke at the end. So that's 3 minutes, right? That's a 3-minute story. And I love teaching this because, it's not your classic, once upon a time, I was working as an intern, blah, blah, blah. But it's still a story. And he frames and uses storytelling techniques in a lot of really interesting ways. So I want to pull out what works so well about that opening. Now, first of all, Steve Jobs is an excellent communicator, right? He's known for his keynotes, kind of part of what he did so well. Simple, simple, simple. Right? That was probably draft number 79 of what he was going to say. There is not a single extra word wasted. But what he's really doing here is a couple things. He's sharing knowledge. He's trying to teach the audience about this new device that no one has ever held or seen or even conceived of before. So that's what he's talking about. Well, it's these three things that you already know and love. It's your iPod, right? It's an internet device, and it's a phone, right? And you that pop that everyone had of a widescreen iPod with touch controls. How 2007 is that, right? But that was, everyone had an iPod, or a lot of people had an iPod, so that made sense. So sharing knowledge in a format that people inherently understood, we didn't have to explain what an iPod was. Describing relationships. This is a 3-in-1 thing, right? This is how this new item is going to actually relate to things you already know. You can think about describing relationships in your organization. This is how sales and marketing actually work together. This is how the executive team functions behind the scenes, right? Telling a story of what these things look like. And it's unexpected, right? There's that joke at the end where he puts a rotary dial on an iPod, right? That's such an easy joke. It works for that audience, because again, the audience is like, you're at the Mac keynote, so you are jacked up about Apple products. And at its core, stories do 2 things. And this is really important. I want to underline this 3 times. Stories provide simulation of how you want people to act. Essentially, they teach people how to do something. And also, they drive inspiration to get people excited and motivated to actually do that thing. Simulation, knowledge how to act. Inspiration, motivation to do it. This is why story works better than a 10-step action plan. You show someone how they've operated, how it works, and you get people excited to be that person in the story. So that's the big underlying thing. When you're thinking about your own stories, a question to ask yourself is, what can we do to simulate our mission? What do we need to teach people how to do? What do you need audiences to understand about the work they do? What do our clients need to know? What do our new hires need to know? What is the thing we're trying to train people to do? Maybe it could just be to be better listeners, or to embrace change, or to take a shot at implementing an AI tool in their daily processes. What's the thing we need to show or teach them? And how are we going to get them excited to do it? This is the question I want you thinking about as you're flying home or driving home. Like, what are the opportunities to plug in a story instead of instructions? And these are not necessarily easy questions, right? So this may come to you as I get into the tools of story. Something may pop up. This is a slide I want you to bring back to your executive team. And I'll give you some ways to tee that up at the end. because you're probably gonna get a lot of really interesting ideas on what you want to show rather than tell. All right, I want to switch gears. Quick check of time. I want to give you some tools. Show of hands. Who here feels like they're an excellent storyteller? Yeah. Okay, I got a couple people. Excellent. Who needs some tools? All right, great. So I asked that not to call it the excellent storytellers, but the excellent storytellers, you probably already doing a lot of this. So I want to start from the beginning. When it comes to telling stories, and I'll tell a few in a moment, where do we go to get our ideas? This is often the biggest question I get. People ask me, like, okay, I get it. I did the story of my name. I've got a story there. But I can't come up with all these great stories. I'm struggling about where to start. Here's where to start. Look for moments in your life where you felt a strong emotion. That's it. What is a moment in your life or your career where you felt a strong emotion? There's a story there. And what I challenge you to do is, you don't have to figure out the story, but when you're going through work, you're running into a roadblock, or you're having a life moment, jot that down somewhere. Even recently, I was buying a new car a couple weeks ago. I had never bought a new car. I was so stressed out. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna write this down. Buying a Hyundai. Freaking out. I'm gonna come back to that in a month or two and figure out what's the message there. What is the shift I made to get over that? You know, buyer's remorse, the anxiety, the bargaining, all that kind of stuff. I'm not worried about the details of the story, but the emotion was there, so there's something interesting there. Maybe you just had a big argument with your CEO, or maybe you're dealing with a really frustrating employment situation. Or on the personal side of things, positive emotions. The birth of my son has written so many stories for me. Great moments, lows, highs, the 2 a.m. moment where I'm sitting thinking, how am I gonna figure this out tomorrow? I've got 2 workshops, I'm no sleep. All of those moments have something you can teach. You can show and you can inspire. But without the emotion, the story goes nowhere. We do not want to listen to flat stories. They're boring and useless. I'll just say it right now. This is the raw material. The other thing that makes for really important and useful stories, and this is probably the thing that most of my storytelling clients in the corporate sphere forget, is great stories need sensory detail. So what do I mean by that? When you're telling the story, I need you to describe what it is you saw in that interview room when you were interviewing for that job, what you saw on the wall, what did you see on the subway on your way to that job interview? I need you to talk about what did you touch? How sweaty were your palms as you handed in your final exam for your last exam of undergrad? Or what did you taste? Your mouth was so dry it felt like a desert. You were so nervous trying to speak at your alumni networking event and give the introduction. Or smell. I could smell the sour, burnt coffee that had been sitting in that pot for 8 hours as our marathon brainstorming session dragged on and on and on. All these little details, these little sprinklings, what they do is they satisfy our brain. That gives us dopamine hits as an audience. This is the stuff we crave as human beings. When you describe and you light up the imagination of your audience, what happens is there's dopamine released in the audience's brain. And what great, really interesting neuroscience studies have shown is that dopamine, one, is tied to pleasure. It's a pleasure chemical. People enjoy that at a very baseline. And second, dopamine is tied to memory. The more interesting and exciting your story is, the more likely they are to remember it. Just like you remember a great movie, or a great novel, or a great moment in a play, or a theater production, you will remember the story if it's exciting. And you make it exciting by adding descriptive detail. So many stories I see have this sanded off, and that's not the point. That's you're rowing in the opposite direction. Adding a little bit of this detail just lights everything up. It makes you a phenomenal storyteller. So, the last type of sensory detail is right there in the brain. So there's the 5 senses, obviously we know. There's also the sense of the thinking mind. So this is like that 6th sense, non-ghost edition, where, especially if you're telling a story about something that happened a long time ago, like when you were a child or when you were earlier in your career, what were you thinking in that moment? That's such a transportive detail that can be really helpful to talk about how you thought about work when you were a 23-year-old versus now when I'm looking at the audience, we're 24, 25, I can tell. That's a great detail to include too. So that's all little stuff you can sprinkle in to get that dopamine hit for your audience so they love it and listen and remember it. So, to practice, I want to do an exercise. Quick check time. This is another exercise you can bring back home. It's one of my favorites. You're going to do it at your table. I'm going to do a little longer for this. I'll give it about 7 minutes. Here's how we're going to practice descriptive detail. I want you to, with a partner or a group of 3, it doesn't matter, you can be flexible. I want you to think of a place you used to love to visit as a kid. Someplace you used to love to visit as a child. It could be a family member's house, a grandparent's house. It could be a vacation destination. It could be school. It could be an activity you would do. Just a place. It could be your basement. A place you used to love to visit as a child. And I want one person to go first. And all I want you to do is take 90 seconds, 2 minutes. Just describe what it was like being in that place. I don't want you to worry about a story. You don't have to tell the wildest time where my best friend John fell off the roof and broke his arm and went to the yacht. Don't do that. Just describe what it was like being in that place. And I want to challenge you to use all 6 of those senses. What were the things you touched? What were the things you saw? What were the things you smelled? What were the things you ate? What were the things you heard, sounds? What were the thoughts you had in that place? And partners, just imagine it. Imagine that place in your head. That's your whole job. And then when that person's done, switch to the next person and describe your next place. So you'll have a chance to listen to 1 or 2 and then tell and describe your own as well. We'll do this for about 8 minutes. It's a really quick exercise. We'll kind of rotate. Does this make sense? What we're about to do. When we come back, I definitely want to hear a couple of these details, so we'll run some mics for that one. So 8 minutes on the clock. Choose who wants to go first, and I will choose who will go first. The person who goes first is the person who traveled the farthest. All right, 8 minutes on the clock. Go for it. Now's the fun part. I want to hear some of these details. Again, I was walking around eavesdropping. I heard so many good ones. We have some microphone runners over here. I would love to share, or ask you to share, what was a detail that stuck out from one of your partner's descriptions? Not your own, something your partner said that really popped in your imagination. And you don't have to give all the context. I just want to hear, what was that detail? Yeah, we got a hand right here. So let's run our mic up here. And you can show your hand, you can be next in line, whoever wants to be next.
Thank you. So one detail that popped from my partner's story was the spray in the face from the soda machine. And our siblings would go and get soda.
I love that. Little spray. I was listening to that one, being a little kid reaching up to catch that. Yeah, okay, we got one here, and then we'll go back there. This might be fun.
So we had 3 stories that described love, but they all came through food.
Love that. Yeah, the feeling of love translated through taste. Love that, love that. Let's go back there. I think we have one.
Yeah, the story that was shared here regarding horses and the feel of the whiskers close to the face and how connected she felt just by having that feeling of touch and love at the moment that she was caring for that horse.
Lovely. Yeah, touch translated to thoughts and love. So we have a hand over there, and then I think we have a hand there too. So let's do there. You can be next.
Thank you. So my partner talked about fishing on the pier with her dad and looking across, when the sun would go down, looking across on the lights, she would see the lights in Tijuana.
Cool. Coming up at sunset. Yeah, nice. Look out here.
My partner shared about just the warmth of the beach and the sand. And it connected with me because I have similar fond memories. So it just, I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that feels like.
I love that. The feeling of warmth of sand on your feet specifically. Yeah, so cool. Let's do one more. Does anyone have one? Yeah, I see a hand back there in the blue. We can run a mic over there. Oh, yeah, I saw another hand here. We can do back to back. Yeah.
We're going to date ourselves, but we shared the memory of stacking the library books up to like under your chin, and just the smell of the old library books, and what a special memory that was for her and her grandpa to do together.
I love that. That's a great way to end it. The smell of a library book. You know what that's a specific smell. Yeah. It's different from a new book smell. It's different from a book you own smell. It is a library book smell. I love that. That's taking me back, just transporting back to my elementary school library, right? So we could go on and on. I love this. I love this exercise. Again, one, everyone escaped with no injury from that exercise. Right? We can all do it, which means you can take this back and run it with your teams. These are low-risk exercises. I do a lot of trainings where I kind of up the risk level a little bit. Obviously, in a room of 200, we haven't prepped anything. I'm going to keep it pretty simple. These are really simple exercises that are all about working the muscles of storytelling. You know, just like a great athlete will not just go and play basketball all day. They'll work on specific stuff. They'll work on their shots. They'll work on their dribbling. They'll work on in the gym. This is gym exercise for being a great storyteller, right? You gotta work on these fundamental skills separately so you feel comfortable getting up and telling a 90-second anecdote at the drop of a hat when the moment calls for it, all right? And remember, I'm pretty sure I can be confident in making this. These little descriptive details, you will remember them. From this partner exercise you just did with someone you may have just met, those little details stick in your brain. They're so sticky, way stickier than any bullet point I will ever put on a slide. The last thing I want to cover in our last 10 minutes, is perfect, is the final piece of what's a fundamental building block of being a great storyteller. And it's landing the plane. So a show of hands, who has ever caught themselves starting a story, getting halfway through that story, and realizing you are now so far off the highway, you have no idea how you got to talking about your college roommate when the story is about giving feedback, right? We've all been there. We've all been there. I get there all the time. This is normal. So, first of all, it's really helpful to practice. Right? Just like with any skill, practice telling your story to someone. They'll give you that instant feedback and say, that 90 seconds about your Aunt Linda, you can cut that. So that's easy. That's step one. That's $0 practice. Great stories follow a simple structure. This is a 4-part structure that you can plug into anytime you want to tell a story. This is also the makings of a fantastic generative AI prompt. You can brain dump your story and say, use Dave's framework from this slide and help me rewrite this story so it actually makes sense. That is a really good use of AI to help you become a great storyteller. AI is great as a feedback. It can help you with details. All of this stuff can be helpful as a framework to plug in. So I just want to add that as well. Every story starts with a moment. This is where you were when the story started. Once upon a time, I was in this moment, I was in the break room, and the CEO walked in, right? You gotta set some context. You don't wanna just start with the action, just where were you? What was happening in the world when the story started? Don't spend more than 10 seconds here. Very simple. I was 29 years old, and I was searching for a job, living at home with my parents. Enough to get a sense of where are we in the world. Then comes the struggle. This is the meat or the non-animal protein of your story. This is the struggle, this is the good stuff, this is where things get hard and you figure something out. This is where the emotion comes in. So more often than not, your initial story nugget will actually be the struggle you felt. And you're gonna work backwards from that to build the story around it. So don't be worried if you got, I just had this moment, but I'm not sure where to go. This is where the structure comes in. You'll figure out what context is helpful and where to go from here. The struggle is, I'll give my car example, right? The struggle was I never bought a car before and I was freaked out that I was gonna get ripped off by this person sitting across from me. I'm about to make a major financial choice, right? So I did this research, I did X, I did Y, I did Z. What was the hard thing you were doing? Even if it's a positive emotion, what was the struggle that got you there? Or the work you had to do to get there? Right? That's part 2 of the story. Then, what changed? What changed from the hard part to where you are today? What did you realize? What work did you do to fix the problem? What help did you seek? What person came in out of nowhere and saved the day? What shifted? So for me, buying a car, I realized this anxiety was something I'd learned from 20 years of behavior and making my own buyer decisions. So I decided to take a different approach and listen to my wife. Always a good shift. Always a good lesson. The shift could be, I talked to my mentor and realized my approach to this difficult direct report of mine was all off. So I completely altered the way I structured my communications with them. And this is what changed. Right? The change was I met the love of my life. The change was I grew up and got over myself. Whatever that is, you have to put your finger on it. Because we need to know how you got from the struggle to the shift, to the point of why you're telling the story. And the lesson is, the oak tree got broken in half by the storm because it was inflexible. We need more flexibility in the face of change. What's the one sentence moral of your story? This doesn't have to be a whole long spiel. It's ideal if you boil it down to, this is why I'm telling you the story. Make it obvious, hit them over the head with it. The iPhone is a phone, an internet device, and an iPod together. That's the message, right? He was trying to tell in that story. The message is, I want to hear your feedback earlier in the project process. Otherwise, I can't do anything about it. This is what it looks like when you give early feedback. Things get great, and you get a happy customer, right? Really simple. A lot of stories fail and don't land because they have 3 messages. It's too complicated. This is feedback I find myself giving over and over and over again to executives that I coach to get up on stage and speak and tell stories. 1 message per story. You can tell the same story 3 different ways to get 3 different messages to different audiences. That's fine. But in a given moment, 1 story, 1 idea. Because otherwise it's too convoluted. It doesn't make sense. Is that landing? Yeah. I'm going to give some examples before we're going to wrap up for the day. We're about at time. Moment, struggle, shift, message. Moment, struggle, shift, message. That's it. These stories are really simple. So I'm going to tell a really embarrassing story. The very first business trip I ever took, was in my first job after undergrad when I was working for a boutique change management consultancy in San Francisco. I was 22 years old, and it was 3 weeks into that job, and I was asked to go to Atlanta, Georgia, to spend a week interviewing executives at the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Atlanta, Georgia. I was psyched. It was going to be workshops, it was going to be interviews, it was going to be my first hands-on experience doing the change management consulting I had been hired to do. The struggle kicked in because I was very much a 22-year-old. So when I landed in Atlanta, one of my best friends from home was still in undergrad at Emory University. And it was a Tuesday night, he texted me and said, Dave, it's Tuesday, it's going out night. You just got in town. Come out with us. Me being a 22-year-old, it's like, that's great. Tuesday night. It's super fun. I just got here. It was a free trip from work. I'm gonna see my best friend. I go to his frat house with 20 of his closest friends. We go out, we go to one bar, we go to a second bar, we go to a third club that was underneath a parking lot. Things got a little hazy at that point, and I ended up back at the hotel at like 2 a.m. Woke up the next morning, a lot of sunlight coming through the window, too much. Multiple alarms going off. Look at my phone, there are 3 missed calls from my manager. 3 texts, where are you? It's 9:50. Our first meeting started at 9, at the client site. And I'm gonna date myself again, this is pre-Uber. So I had to go get showered, get dressed, go downstairs, hail a cab, explain to the cab where I was going. I got there 90 minutes, 2 hours late. My manager gave me the dirtiest look. I sneak into my chair, and after that first interview that we were in, she turns to me and goes, you know, Dave, I'm gonna have to tell our managing director about this. She's not gonna be happy. Just in my head, I'm thinking, I'm fired, this is it, I'm never gonna get a job again. She waited till the end of the day to tell me she was joking. And she said, but never do that again. That was idiotic, don't do that. So, the moment me being a 22-year-old going out with my 22-year-old buddies in a very different context, the struggle was being extremely hungover that whole day. The shift was, I have rules now when I travel for work. I matured very quickly in that day. And the message is, well, what's the message of that story? You definitely say, don't drink before your first day. It's a very clear message. It's a very obvious message to most people, but not to 22-year-old me, no sir. So again, the point I tell this embarrassing story, I feel myself blushing right now, even though I tell this story all the time, is it's about being vulnerable. You know, I'm not that guy anymore. It's also really important to realize when you do make a huge mistake, you can own it, you can laugh at yourself. There's all these different opportunities to tell a story like that, to show people how to recover from errors and that you've been there before, you've been in their shoes. You can look for different moments to tell something like that. Another story, a much shorter one, is how becoming a father changed my approach to change. I always talk about how the change curve, if you were in my morning workshop, these emotions people go through when experiencing a change, how it's true even for positive changes, even for happy changes, things you've been looking forward to maybe your whole life, like becoming a dad. I still felt some really strong negative emotions in those early days as I was adjusting to this massive shift in every aspect of my life. You know, from sleep to communicating with my partner to figuring out how to make money happen, right, to working and traveling, all of these struggles that I was feeling emotionally and then fighting it and saying, but this is what I wanted. So the shift was just giving myself permission to realize that I'm going through a change just like all the people I coach to go through changes. And it's okay to be frustrated in those moments because that's just a normal thing about becoming a new dad. You're doing things for the first time, and that's really hard. Important things. If you weren't frustrated, it wouldn't matter so much. There's all these moments. So we talked about, I mentioned that inclusion exercise where I get people to tell stories about a moment they felt a sense of belonging at work. And those are such powerful stories to again capture and share where people feel comfortable and confident. What does it mean to be a part of a group in our organization? Showing, not telling. I can go on and on and on. We're out of time. What I want to do is, again, remind you, I'll send you these slides, but I want to give you some homework, because I can't resist. How to take what we learned in this workshop and bring it back home. I want to challenge you to start to build a storytelling culture in your organization. This is something you can do. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's a habit you can lead by example with. So at your next exec meeting, next time you can carve out 15 minutes of time, ask the group, which of our company's values is the hardest to communicate to new hires? Maybe that's an opportunity to start to solicit some examples that you can simulate and inspire using these storytelling tools. Start to get some stories going. Or ask them, what's a moment you felt you made a difference? At work, in your personal life, there's an emotional moment you can start to harvest from. Here's one of my favorites. If someone shadowed your team this week, what story would they walk away with? I don't know. Could be a good one, could be not one you can put on the website. Right? Maybe that's the point. Bring it back to your work as a people leader. What you just described, VP of sales or CEO or CTO or CIO, what you just described is what I believe we mean when we talk about this particular value. That's a perfect example of what it means to say we overcome things as a team, or we meet people where they are, or whatever your value is, we get stuff done. That's a perfect example of what that value actually looks like in real life. Let's write that down. Let's tell that story. Let's practice that. Let's get in front of everyone and start sharing that as widely as we can. Or how can we share that audience, or share that story with audiences that need to hear it? You, VP of Engineering, what a great example. How do we get that in front of marketing so they can make that into the next campaign? Or how do we get that in front of customers so they stick with us even through a price increase? Right? Let's look for these opportunities to use these great stories to get stuff done. Right? That's where this stuff becomes really, really useful and becomes an influencing tool you can use as a people leader to get yourself into conversations that maybe you weren't already in. These are all these applications of how you can use this stuff. So, with that, I think we're at time. So I want to just offer you, if you want to work with me, come find me. I love teaching this workshop. There's a much longer workshop where we can do it for your managers, we can build a story playbook, we can practice this, lots of good stuff. If you go to this QR code, you will get all of these slides, all of these exercises, you'll get my contact info. But otherwise, if you have questions, come on up. I'd love to chat with you. I got nowhere to be. But in the meantime, give yourselves a round of applause for practicing today. Have a great rest.